In 1787, the Founding Fathers drew up the Constitution, creating the Federal Republic that is the United States of America we know today. The document set in place the procedures of the U.S. government, and much of what it described remains unchanged today. One of such procedures was the infamous presidential pardon. Though the country often benefited from its use, especially in its early days, the presidential pardon was largely unnecessary and has introduced issues to the justice system. The pardon was originally proposed at the Constitutional Convention by Charles Pinckney. The power wasn't Pinckney's original creation, though. It was derived from an ancient English precedent. This precedent was the prerogative of kings, a power that predated the Norman invasion of Britain in 1066. Initially, this royal power was entirely unlimited and was often used as a reward for military service and in exchange for money. The power was restricted in 1701, when Parliament excluded its use from impeachment. Today, this power of the President remains all but entirely the same compared to the power held by William III of England in 1701. Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution plainly states that the President shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. Over the years, Supreme Court decisions have repeated the unrestricted nature of the pardon. The only two rules are that it can't interfere with impeachment procedures and that it applies only to federal crimes, i.e., offenses against the United States. As the first president, George Washington was faced with the issue of how to address this powerful ability. After taking office in 1789, the time to use the pardon finally came in 1795. A federal militia of 1,300 had just crushed the Whiskey Rebellion in western Pennsylvania, and they'd brought back rebels for trial. Only 2 were convicted, sentenced to death by hanging. Alexander Hamilton was disappointed to see the small number of convictions, but wanted to see those who had been charged pay. Washington instead decided, in an act of forgiveness, to grant all those involved in the Whiskey Rebellion a pardon, helping to quell anti-government sentiments. George Washington had issued 12 pardons by the end of his 2 terms, an all-time low, excepting 2 presidents whose terms had been ended early and entirely pardonless. The use of pardons grew more and more, numbering 4 digits for several 20th century presidents. Since Washington's day, pardons have been used in key moments throughout history, developing a more defined role, especially when used in the midst of conflict. At the end of his term, President George H.W. Bush remarked, "When earlier wars have ended, presidents have historically used their power to pardon, to put bitterness behind us and look to the future. This healing tradition reaches at least from James Madison's pardon of Lafitte's pirates after the War of 1812, to Andrew Johnson's pardon of soldiers who had fought for the Confederacy, to Harry Truman's and Jimmy Carter's pardons of those who had violated the selective service laws in World War II and Vietnam." Aside from these generally positive uses, perhaps the most infamous presidential pardon was President Ford's pardon of President Nixon in the wake of the Watergate scandal. Ford reasoned that the pardon would allow the nation to heal and would give Nixon and his family some peace, saying,
"Theirs is an American tragedy in which we all have played a part. It could go on and on and on, or someone must write the end to it. I have concluded that only I can do that, and if I can, I must."
Nonetheless, the pardon of Nixon was harshly criticized, and many saw it as a corrupt bargain based on political allegiances. Further controversy has come about surrounding the presidential pardon in the modern day. In one case, President Trump pardoned billionaire Conrad Black, who'd written a flattering biography for Trump, thought by many not to be a coincidence. Additionally, President Trump has considered pardoning servicemen accused of war crimes, in some cases before the trials have even begun. According to veteran David Lepin, the impact of such a pardon comes in three principal ways. 1. Pardons like these send a message to those who are in the military now that serious crimes can be forgiven, and so the thought of there being military justice, of people being held accountable for violations of their oath and for the law, can be wiped away with a pardon. 2. Our allies have to then wonder, can they trust that we are going to hold people accountable when they commit wrongdoing? And third, and maybe most important, it shows our enemies and our adversaries, if we are not willing, again, to hold people accountable for the crimes they commit, then how do their actions compare? Are they more likely to do the same kind of things to our service members that our service members have committed if they're not being held accountable? However, the dangers of the presidential pardon have been noted, and some politicians have been doing their best to dull its power. For example, a flaw in New York State's double jeopardy law meant that the presidential pardon had more power than it was meant to. However, the issue has been recently resolved. On the new legislation, the state's attorney general stated, it ensures that in the event that a person receives a presidential pardon based on a close relationship or self-interest, New York would preserve its authority to pursue legal action against that individual for crimes committed under state law. Presidential pardons have helped the country. They've brought peace in times of conflict and brought humanity to the justice system. However, they've also interfered with justice. After all, the president is one person with their own interests in mind. Some people see the pardon as a way out of an unfair sentencing. However, this is only indicative of a larger issue in the justice system that should be addressed rather than avoided. In the end, the presidential pardon is a dangerous tool that can be used against the will of the country and instead for the sake of the president and their friends.